Imagine a quiet night in the vast grounds of the Forbidden City, where every sound seems to melt into the cold marble, where red lanterns cast a glow on the walls, carved with ancient dragons and phoenixes. In that mystical space, a young woman is chosen to spend the night with the most powerful man in China, the Emperor. At first glance, many people would imagine a romantic night filled with affection and imperial splendor. But in reality, the moment begins with cold silence, strict surveillance, and ancient rituals performed without emotion. There are no welcoming smiles, no affectionate glances, and absolutely no room for personal choice. The woman is not allowed to speak, is not allowed to carry anything on her person, and is not allowed to show any emotion, unless the emperor gives her permission. That entire private meeting was no longer a matter between two people, but had become part of a giant political machine where every gesture served a single goal: to protect the absolute safety of the emperor and maintain order for the dynasty. The seemingly private space, the emperor's bedroom where he retreated after a day of state affairs, was in fact one of the most tightly controlled in the empire. Every object, every candlelight, every footstep was monitored by men without families, eunuchs loyal to the throne. Even a seemingly private evening was part of a political ritual, where personal affection was regulated by strict rules and the specter of betrayal. This was not a space for intimacy, but a stage where power, security, and formality coexisted under a thin veil of silk. It is hard to imagine that amid the walls of dragons, amid the sound of wind blowing through the glazed tile roof, a meeting could take place without room for personal freedom. But that was the reality of life in the Forbidden City, where privacy was an illusion and closeness to the emperor was a favor bestowed by convention, not by emotion. In such a context, the chosen woman was no longer a person with dreams, sorrows, and a heart that could love. She was just a piece of the imperial machine, a role player, in a ritual that had been repeated over and over again throughout the dynasties. That moment, seemingly intimate, is where power and control are most evident. In the darkness amid the dim light of the palace lamps, every emotion must be silenced, every thought must be hidden, and the human presence, whether emperor or concubine, is bound by rules as ancient as the walls of the Forbidden City. And it is this absolute control that turns what once seemed beautiful into a cold testament to the way power always demands sacrifice, not just of the body, but of freedom of emotion, of the very life within each person. When mentioning the two words, harem, people often imagine a lavish world filled with silk powder and perfume, where beauties with stunning beauty are pampered like flowers in a greenhouse. It is thought that the harem is a place of pleasure, where emotions and desires are unleashed according to the will of the emperor, but the truth is much harsher. The harem is not a space of freedom or passion, but a tightly managed system where every movement, every breath of women must obey ancient laws, and the watchful eyes never leave. Concubines from the lowliest to the most noble empress lived within a strict hierarchy. Each was assigned a clear rank, not only according to beauty, but also according to family background, the emperor's favor, and the support of the imperial court. Beneath the brocade robes and soft smiles was a silent, unforgiving competition, where survival depended on the gaze of a man and the will of people who were never seen before. Officials, eunuchs, and sometimes even the emperor's mother. In that context, even the private moments between the emperor and his concubine were not entirely theirs. There was no spontaneous romance, no awkward whispers like in novels. Every encounter was prearranged, planned, from who was chosen, how they were prepared, how they were brought, until they left in silence. Behind closed doors, there were not only two people, but also the invisible presence of the palace system, from the harem diary manager to the eunuch standing outside to keep watch, to the people who meticulously recorded the date and time of each emperor's visit. And one cannot help but wonder, why was such tight control necessary? The answer lies in the nature of feudal power. The emperor was the son of heaven, the one who stood above all people, but he was also the most vulnerable to attack, both physically and in authority. A hug could be a trap. A touch could mean death waiting. In dynasties where rebellion and poisoning were commonplace, controlling the bedroom was the only way to protect the throne. The emperor was not only the husband of the harem, but the center of the dynasty's life. Each time he favored a woman, it meant changing the balance of power in the palace. It was no longer a matter of love, but of politics. That truth makes the harem, which is portrayed as a paradise on earth, become stifling and terrifying. One wrong glance, one out-of-bounds remark, or one wrong approach to the emperor can also cause a concubine to be banished to the cold palace, or worse, never to see the light of day again. That place that seems peaceful is actually a silent battlefield, where the smart ones survive by understanding the rules of the game, and the dreamers are crushed in the darkness. And so, the harem became a living symbol of a society where power overwhelms emotions, where each woman was not allowed to live as a complete human being, but as a tool, sometimes to give birth to an heir, sometimes to maintain political power, and sometimes just to beautify the dynasty. In that context, beauty was not a blessing, but a responsibility, a bondage, the sweetest trap of all. If one day you were to step into the inner palace of the Forbidden City, you would surely see beautiful but soulless faces, eyes filled with a terrifying caution, and a heavy silence that enveloped the seemingly splendid space. Because their life does not lie in the heart, but in the understanding of the rules. And in the inner palace, the rules are always stronger than love. As the lights of the palace began to dim, and darkness fell over the glazed roofs of the Forbidden City, one of the most important rituals in the life of the imperial harem began. It was not simply a matter of choosing a woman to sleep with the emperor, but a carefully orchestrated, calculated, and powerful process. Every night after finishing dinner and handling state affairs, the emperor would return to his bedroom, a place that seemed private, but was in fact the secret political theater of the imperial court. Here, a gilded wooden tray was brought on, which were placed pieces of jade card-polished, each engraved with the name of a concubine in the harem. This tray was not a decorative object, but the ultimate symbol of the power of choice. The power to decide who would have the honor of being close to the emperor. But even that power of choice, seemingly absolute, did not belong entirely to the emperor. These jade tablets, small as they were the product of countless hands. The senior eunuch close relatives, even Queen Mother, your political forces in the court, all can secretly influence to put the name of the woman they want to nominate in the most prominent visible position on the tray. Such coincidences are not random. Sometimes it is a way to forge alliances with powerful families. Sometimes it is a reward for loyalty or a test to see how the harem and courtiers will react. The emperor's choice of whom to marry for a night of favor can lead to changes in positions in the palace, a shift in the balance of power, or even the beginning of a secret struggle that lasts for years. When the emperor flips a jade tablet, the act seems to be an expression of freedom, but in fact, it is part of a carefully designed matrix of power. The card flipped is not simply a woman's name, but a piece in a political chessboard where every move is calculated, every choice has consequences. And the woman chosen, whether happy, proud, or nervous, probably knows that behind that honor lies calculations she cannot control. From a modern perspective, this may seem like a deprivation of personal freedom, a blatant manipulation of even the most intimate of things. But through the eyes of the times, it was perhaps necessary to maintain stability. In a court where every move could lead to upheaval, where the harem was the shadow of politics controlling the emperor's emotions, was a way of controlling the empire. And the strange thing is that sometimes the emperor himself did not object to this, for he knew that a wrong choice at night could lead to chaos during the day. Thinking of that jade tray, we see it as a beautiful yet oppressive symbol. It not only contains the woman's name, but also the sacrifice desire, jealousy, and ambition of the entire harem. It is as light as silk, but as heavy as fate. And when a card is turned over, a fateful night begins, not only for that woman, but perhaps for an entire dynasty. When the jade slip was turned over by the emperor's hands, it was not just a sign of choice, but the opening shot in a long, elaborate, and tightly held series of rituals, designed not only to please the emperor, but also to protect the throne itself. For the chosen woman from that moment on, every action, every step, even every breath was shrouded in an atmosphere both mysterious and oppressive, an atmosphere of control and ritual. First, she had to be informed by a eunuch, and she was not allowed to refuse. She immediately entered a preparation phase where both her body and spirit had to be purified to be worthy of the emperor's favor. She was taken to bathe in a special bath, not ordinary water, but water soaked with various herbs. Rare herbs, carefully selected ginger mugwort, camphor, even saffron. These ingredients are believed not only to have cleansing properties, but also to ward off evil spirits, attract good fortune, and stimulate vitality, all to ensure that the encounter will be smooth, fulfilling, and, above all, likely to result in pregnancy. After bathing, she did not wear elaborate clothes like in festivals or parties. Instead, she was dressed in a silk shirt embroidered with traditional symbols, like the lotus, the phoenix, or the symbol of fertility. This is a garment that not only covers the body, but also conveys a hidden message. This woman does not come to seduce, but to fulfill a sacred duty, to serve the royal lineage. It is a strange harmony between power and biology, between politics and the human body. Next came the grooming, gentle but ritualistic. Her hair was combed, her skin powdered, her lips lightly painted with rose wax. But absolutely no jewelry, no bracelets, no earrings, no brooches, because every little thing on her body could be a hiding place for poison or weapons. Even the fingernails are carefully checked to make sure that there is nothing unusual, no sharp objects attached. The senior eunuch will be the one to perform the final inspection. And only when everything was up to standard was she sent away. However, the journey to the emperor's palace was not on foot. She was not allowed to walk on her own. It was too free, too dangerous. Instead, she was placed on a stretcher covered with soft silk, gently as if being cherished, but actually a discreet measure of surveillance. The stretcher was carried by special eunuchs, people who are free from family ties, absolutely loyal, and incapable of losing their minds. Not letting her feet touch the ground is to completely eliminate the possibility of her hiding something in her shoes or moving unexpectedly. On the quiet and dark road leading to the temple, she was not allowed to talk, not allowed to laugh, not allowed to glance left and right. It was a paradoxical procession, carrying a woman to a place of glory, but also of abyss. Just one ill-timed word, one wrong expression could mean she would never be chosen again. This was no longer a date, but a final vetting for a woman to gain access to the highest center of power. And the strangest thing was, it all took place in silence. No one spoke. No one exchanged words, only the sound of silk fabric rubbing against each other, the quiet footsteps of eunuchs, and the flickering lanterns reflecting on the blue-tiled roof. In that silence, a slender body was gradually moving towards the place called glory, but could also be the grave of freedom, of individuality, and of human dignity. Because on that night she was no longer herself. She represented the strict operation of an ancient dynasty where every intimate moment was stamped with rules. When people think of the imperial palace, they often imagine the scene of graceful palace maids strolling along the marble corridors, their dresses gently swaying in the afternoon breeze like walking flowers. But the truth behind that splendid curtain is a completely different picture, especially when a concubine is chosen to serve the emperor at night. At this time, she does not walk, is not free to choose. Her own path is not even allowed to let her feet touch the ground. She is carried on a stretcher covered with soft silk light, as smoke smooth as water, and silent as a beautiful coffin. The stretcher ride was not a favor or indulgence, but an extremely strict security measure. In a feudal dynasty where the death of a king could lead to the burial of hundreds of people, it was not unreasonable to control every step a woman took when entering the palace. A hairpin, a sharp stone hidden in a shoe, or a small object wrapped in a lining, all could become an assassination tool. And to completely eliminate such risks, the only way was to not giving her a chance to take anything with her. The stretcher was not carried by ordinary eunuchs, but by a carefully selected group of people, high-ranking eunuchs loyal, and with many years of service to the imperial palace. They were not allowed to talk to the person lying on the stretcher. Their eyes looked straight ahead. Their steps were steady, neither fast nor slow, and they always maintained a solemn attitude as if they were participating in a national ceremony. On the seemingly endless stone corridor, amidst the flickering lantern light reflecting the lifeless faces of the stone statues, the stretcher passed silently, like a cloud passing through the dark night. Soft, but extremely cold. The stretcher had a very strong symbolic meaning. It represented the elegance of the chosen one, like a goddess being pampered, but it was also the clearest demonstration of the fact that the woman had completely lost control of her body. She cannot choose her path. She cannot know the route, and she cannot stop if she wishes. She is an object to be transferred like a living gift in the midst of court ritual. Some people have wondered why not let them go by themselves. But for the ancients, especially in the palace full of suspicion and intrigue, Every action had a meaning. A woman walking freely on the way to the heavenly palace could be seen as an act of transgression, or, worse, a sign of a powerful backer trying to demonstrate his power. And where there is a sign of power, there is a threat to the throne. Therefore, the carrying away, thought to be a formality, is actually a mechanism to eliminate all manifestations of excess. In the darkness of the Forbidden City, where every brick is steeped in history, the silence of the stretcher passing by echoes louder than any footsteps. It reminds us that no matter how beautiful or intelligent a woman is, when she is on that stretcher, she is part of the system, a cog in the imperial machine. And if she makes a mistake or accidentally deviates from the rules, the stretcher could be the thing that brings her not only to the palace, but also to a fate that no one dares to predict. Because in the palace, silence is always the safest way to survive, and the stretcher, with its soft appearance, is the means to impose that silence on those who have been honored to step close to the emperor. When the silk-covered palanquin stopped in front of the palace gate, and the lanterns in the corridor swayed gently like the breath of the night, the chosen concubine approached what seemed to be the most sacred moment of her life. But strangely, the place where love should have been present, the emperor's bedroom, was a place lacking in emotion more than any other space in the palace. In that place, everything is measured, monitored, and programmed like a machine. There is no room for spontaneity. There is no room for human nature. As soon as she arrived, the woman was checked one last time. It might have been a glance from the eunuch on guard. It might have been a silent nod from the chamberlain. But whoever did it, this test had one final meaning to confirm that she was absolutely no danger to the emperor. And only when everything was assured would the door to the world of absolute power open. Inside the room, the dim light from the oil lamp created an atmosphere that was both solemn and strange. And when she was placed on the bed, all sound stops. In that room, there was only the breathing of two people, and invisible rules hanging between them. One of the most important rules was, she was not allowed to speak unless the emperor initiated the conversation. This is not indifference, but principle of status expression. Like everything else in the royal court, language was subject to power. It was a strange ordeal. Lying next to a man who held the world in his hands, but not being allowed to speak or show emotion without permission. It made the moment of intimacy a symbolic ritual rather than a human act. Sex in the palace was no longer a matter of emotion or instinct. It was a form of political engagement, a means of producing heirs, and also a way of maintaining order in the palace. Everything that happened in that room was watched. Although no one was allowed to stand in the room when the emperor was with his concubines, there is always a group of eunuchs outside the door, keeping watch over the time. Normally, each intimacy only lasts about an hour. When the time is almost up, the eunuch will knock or call softly to signal. If there was no response from within, they had the right to open the door. A polite but warning that no one, not even the emperor, was to go beyond the boundaries set by the court. This is no longer a bedroom. This is a stage of power where the most powerful man in the country and the most favored woman that night must play the same role in a play written by history, tradition, and politics. Emotions have no place there. Every minute that passes is a count of order. Every movement is under the eye of the system of recording, monitoring, and arranging. And when the time was up without warning, without another hug or goodbye closing ceremony, The concubine was wrapped in her original thin silk dress, then placed on the stretcher again, and like a stream flowing upstream, she was carried back to where she came from. Quietly, without conversation, without emotion. The only thing left is marked in the books. That on that night, at that hour, that woman was with the emperor. If the emperor was pleased, she could be chosen again. If she became pregnant, she could become the future mother. But if not, she would return to the ranks waiting for the next selection, or perhaps never be called again. Maybe to outsiders this is an honor, but to insiders this is a trade-off, where the body becomes an instrument of order, and where power is no longer in the gaze, but in time, silence, and absolute obedience. When the light in the emperor's bedroom dimmed, when that powerful figure turned his back, and when the time spent with a woman ended, there was no call to hold on, no regretful glances, no promises of tomorrow. All that followed was an exact repetition of the same process. Cold, discreet, and absolutely orderly. The woman who had just experienced the most intimate moment with the man who held the world, now once again, wrapped in silk, lie still on the stretcher, and leave as if she never came. No lingering, no talking to anyone. Silence, the rule, at first had become the norm. No one cared what she felt. No one asked if she had anything to say, because the harem did not exist to listen. It existed to control. And every concubine, every sexual encounter had to follow that silent rhythm, like puppets dancing on the strings of ritual and politics. The return of a concubine is not like the feeling of victory after a battle, but rather like the soldier has just completed his mission. Not allowed to be proud, not allowed to show off. That is how the royal court maintains outward fairness. Don't let anyone stay longer than anyone else. Don't allow any emotions to arise excessively, and never gave any sign that a woman could win too much of the emperor's heart. Everything must be equal, or at least it appears so. Behind the emperor's short-lived decision were a series of long-term consequences. If one concubine was chosen more often than the others, she could become the center of jealousy, intrigue, and even the spark for a secret war in the harem. So, the court, by imposing this ritual, had deliberately blurring any signs of bias, at least in appearance. This was not only to protect the women, but more deeply to protect the emperor from too much influence from any individual, no matter how beautiful he or she was. After that night, everything was meticulously recorded. Her name, the time of meeting, her physical condition, the emperor's reaction. Everything was in the book. This is surveillance at the biological and political level. Not because people were overly curious about the emperor's private life, but because every affair carried with it the possibility of creating an heir. And an heir, even if not yet formed, was still a threat or an opportunity for the entire political system. Therefore, everything had to be recorded, checked, and controlled. One thing worth noting is if the concubine is pregnant, the change in status will take place almost immediately. From an unknown person among hundreds of beauties, she will step up to a position of protection, care, and close monitoring. But if not pregnant, she would return to the waiting circle, and it might take months, even years, to be called again. It is also important to understand that return to silence is not just a personal act, but a reminder to all the rest of the harem that anyone can be chosen, but no one is allowed to stay in the lead role for too long. This is how the court protects itself from the concentration of power, even in love. The empire cannot love anyone too much, because love is the seed of favoritism, and favoritism is a thorn in the side of power. The sad truth is, every concubine, whether chosen or not, lives in a cycle of hope and silence. They groomed themselves, made themselves up, practiced their manners, learned to smile at the right moment, all just to get on the stretcher again. But once they were on it, no one could be sure they would get back. In the royal court, nothing was permanent, not even favor. And so, the night ended in silence just as it had begun. The woman returned to where she had come from, leaving behind the dim light of the emperor's bedroom, a place where all emotions had to give way to the law, and where feelings, if any, were just a side note in the long song called Stabilizing the Dynasty. If we think that the meetings between the emperor and his concubine only lasted for a short night and then sank into oblivion, then perhaps we still do not fully understand the level of meticulousness and extreme control in the Chinese imperial harem. Because each moment of favor was not just an intimate moment, but a link in an extremely tight system of inspection, supervision, and recording that lasted from that night until many months later, even affecting the future of the dynasty. From the very beginning, all information about the selected person is carefully recorded. Names, ranks, dates, and times were entered into the imperial paternal register, a special record of the emperor's encounters. This not only helped determine exactly who had been intimate with the king, but also served as a basis for determining paternity if the woman later bore a child. In an empire where power was passed down through blood, clarity about the father of a child was vital. If a concubine became pregnant after the night of their union, the records would be irrefutable evidence. If a child was born amid doubts, the records would be a tool to prove or disprove the right to inheritance. And that is why the records were kept so carefully. Extremely detailed and careful not only for storage, but to control the future of the entire court. But control did not stop at childbirth. In the harem, the time of unable to visit is also clearly remembered and signaled, especially during menstruation. According to Chinese tradition, this is the period when a woman's body is not in a state of purity, and if the emperor were to be intimate at this time, it was believed to have a negative impact on her vitality, health, and even the fate of the nation. For that reason, concubines had to have their own way of announcing that they were not ready. But because they could not say it directly, to avoid embarrassment or being impolite, they used discreet yet innovative signaling system, a red bracelet, a folded handkerchief placed in a visible place, a ribbon tied around the wrist, or more commonly our lantern hanging in front of the room door. Those signs were a polite way of saying, "I cannot be chosen tonight." However, they were also a silent power play, because in the harem, where each choice can decide the fate of a person's entire life, there are concubines willing to hide the truth, sacrificing their health, even their lives, for another chance to catch the emperor's eye. They quietly removed their lanterns, untied their ribbons, pretending to be ready just to seize a short night that they hoped would change their lives. But such recklessness always comes with danger. If discovered, penalties can be severe, from isolation, demotion, to exile to the cold palace forever. Therefore, the eunuchs, who held the keys to the phallus, were ordered to closely monitor the cycle of each concubine. They memorized, cross-checked, and even physically examined, if necessary, to ensure that no one could circumvent the system by trickery. In some cases, if there was suspicion of fraud, concubines could be physically examined, which for many was the ultimate humiliation, but one that could not be resisted. It can be said that the feudal harem was no different from Agent Clock, where every cog from the emperor to the concubines operates according to an ironclad schedule and order. There is no room for uncontrolled emotions. No moment is random, and if anyone tries to disrupt that rhythm, they are mercilessly eliminated. Ironically, a feminine place like a harem, where people usually think of love, beauty, seduction, is governed by cold numbers, biological charts, and rules no different from a military hospital. But that is the price to keep the throne protected, the lineage clear, and all emotions, including love, in place. Place behind the power. In the closed world of the harem, where hundreds of women lived side by side, and only one man had the right to choose, jealousy was inevitable. But jealousy here was not just envious glances or cruel whispers. It was the spark of political strife, the source of dangerous plots that could destroy an entire dynasty, and the cause of painful tragedies that are deeply engraved in Chinese history. When a concubine is regularly favored by the emperor, she not only becomes the center of admiring gazes, but also target of hundreds of angry hearts. Proximity to the emperor brings power. From material favors influence in the court to the opportunity to conceive a child, the only power that can change a woman's fate in the palace. But it is also that power that makes her target surrounded by never-ending waves of jealousy. In Chinese history, there are many heartbreaking stories about women who became mistresses overnight, victim of poisoning plot, false evidence, or isolated and mentally tortured to the point of exhaustion. There is nothing more cruel than the silent wars between people of the same sex, sharing the same dreams, but never being able to share the same path. In the palace, every woman understands that if they are loved by the emperor just once, they can change their lives. And conversely, if they miss just one opportunity, they can be forgotten forever. However, not all conspiracies are kept in the dark. There are times when jealousy turns into open rebellion, even leading to direct resistance to the emperor. One of the most shocking stories in history occurred during the Ming Dynasty, when the emperor was so fascinated with the art of immortality that he forced concubines to drink alchemy medicine, mixtures containing mercury, sulfur, and other toxic ingredients. Although painted under the name of alchemy aids in reality, many women have suffered pain illness and even slow death because of those poisons. Finally, when fear exceeds the limit, a group of concubines plotted to assassinate the emperor, not to seize power, but simply to end a long nightmare. But the plan failed, and in the harem, failure was never simple. The participants were tortured to death, their bodies dismembered, their names erased from official records. They were not just killed, they were erased from memory as if they had never existed. That was the price of daring to defy the only person who had the right to love to grace, and also the only person who had the right to end someone's life without explanation. But not all stories are bloody. There are quieter tragedies. When a concubine truly loves but cannot keep the emperor's heart, or when a woman is favored but is pushed into the middle of a political current that she herself does not fully understand. Love in the harem, if it exists, always comes with caution. And that is why many concubines choose not to love, not to hope, but to live a life of waiting, waiting, and resignation. They do not live as people full of aspirations, but as ghosts in brocade gradually drifting in the invisible flow of power. And sadly, the harem, a place built to preserve the safety of the royal family, became gilded cage for locked souls. No one is free. No one is truly safe. Every step, every look, every word can be the spark for a purge. Because the emperor's favor is a double-edged sword. It can lift a person to the clouds, but can also plunge an entire dynasty into chaos. If the harem is a place where power and intrigue are spread like a golden net, then in the middle of that net, there is a flower that was once so brilliant that it made the whole world admire. Her name is Duong Ngoc Hoan, but posterity called her by a legendary name, Yang Guifei. Her story is not only a tragic love song between a man who holds a country in his hands and a woman who possesses a beauty that can topple kingdoms, but also a wake-up call about the tragedy of being loved too much, in a world where love is a dangerous act. During the Tang Dynasty, when the country was prosperous and culture reached its peak, Emperor Xuanzong of Tang was a powerful emperor but also passionate about art, music, and beauty. And then he met her, a woman who was not only beautiful in appearance but also talented, charming, and has an unmatched charisma. It is said that as soon as she walked through the hallway, the fragrance lingered all afternoon. When she sang, the musicians stopped to listen. And when she smiled, the king's heart melted. The favor bestowed upon Yang Guifei was unlike any other. She was given titles, property, and even relatives in the Yang family, was brought into the court as an official holding key positions. This makes the court began to crack. As loyalty was gradually replaced by faction, and the emperor seemed to lose his sanity before the soft power of love. In the harem, Yang Guifei was almost become the sun, and the others were but dim stars in orbit around her. But like every bright light, the bigger the shadow it creates. Yang Guifei's favor quickly became a cause for jealousy, and then jealousy turned to hatred. Both inside and outside the palace, voices of opposition grew louder and louder. People believed that she had distracted the emperor from state affairs, that the Yang family was corrupt, and that if the country was in decline, it was because of love. The biggest storm comes when an Lushan rebellion exploded. In the chaos when the capital was threatened, the army could no longer maintain absolute loyalty. At Mongoi Fa, a fateful place, the soldiers resisted and refused to protect the king if Yang Guifei was still alive. They believed that she was the cause of the empire's chaos, the evil spirit that confused the emperor. And so, in that moment of panic, the emperor had to make a decision. The most painful decision of my life, sacrificing the one he loved to keep the throne. Yang Guifei was taken to a temple, and no one knows exactly what happened in her final moments. Some say she committed suicide to preserve her honor. Others say she was strangled by the king's own confidants. The truth was buried under the dust of time, but the sadness lives on in history books. After her death, Emperor Xuanzong of Tang is no longer the same person as before. He lived quietly away from music and painting, and his eyes, as people said, forever carried a wordless regret. She had left taking with her the last remaining part of a king. The story of Yang Guifei is a perfect imperial tragedy, where true love has no place, where beauty is a double-edged sword, and where every step closer to power could be the last step in life. Though centuries have passed, she is still remembered in poetry, songs, and paintings. But few remember that Behind that beauty is a woman who had to love in silence, live under surveillance, and die alone. When we look back at all the complicated rituals, the close supervision, and the tearful stories that took place in the harem, we suddenly realize a simple but terrifying truth. It is not a place of love, but a stage designed to serve power, legacy, and social order. Everything in the harem, from a small jade card, a silk shirt embroidered with a phoenix, to the silent eyes of the eunuchs, said that here personal feelings had no place if they did not submit to the supreme power of the throne. Outsiders may see it as a magnificent, glorious world where every woman lives in luxury, eats delicacies, and has the opportunity to step into the dream of the royal palace. But for those in the know, the harem is a maze full of traps, where every step must be calculated, where a frown can signal disgrace, and where a seemingly glorious night of intimacy can end in isolation or death. Existence in the harem required a certain extreme patience, an extraordinary capacity for endurance, and a flexibility in dealing with people that goes beyond politics. Concubines, whether of noble or common descent, must learn to be quiet, patient, and hide all the things that are inherently human: love, trust, vulnerability, and sometimes even dignity. They must learn not only to live while waiting to be chosen, but also to survive after being chosen. The rituals that prepare for a night of bliss are not only to please the emperor, but also a comprehensive control mechanism where all potential for harm, whether physical or mental, is eradicated at its root. No one is allowed to take the initiative, no one is allowed to express their feelings honestly. Even silence is not a personal choice, it is an order. Everything is shaped by the invisible hands of the system, and so the things that should be associated with life, like love, intimacy, or the ability to procreate, become the most tightly controlled. A seemingly soft system is operated by a terrifying iron discipline. In that world, each woman becomes a link, a tool, an image representing the order that the imperial power wants to maintain. But even in that utter silence, there were whispers of fate. Yang Guifei, with all her beauty and sincere love, was still caught up in the vortex of politics and sacrificed herself for the stability of the throne. The harem teaches us that in any system of power, if emotions are not acknowledged, they will find a way to survive in disguise. That love, if not accompanied by freedom, becomes a burden, the sharpest double-edged sword. And that the women who are forgotten behind the glittering lights of the palace are the strongest souls, because they have lived, suffered, loved, and silently endured it all.